Welcome back to Control the Freak, where we talk about all things control freak related, whether you're a controlling person who wants help to understand the things you do and how to stop it, or you live with or know somebody else who lives with a controlling person, and you want help to either understand it or know when and how to extract yourself from it. My name's Sean Johnson. I'm going to walk you through all of the above. Covered quite a lot of things, haven't we, over the last 5 episodes? We covered what creates a control freak, language, types, coercion. And we also looked at a little bit of my story. And there was a point to all of this. Obviously, there's loads more to come. But it was to give you a framework, a reference point for some things, to get you to where we're going to go today. And today is the 3 steps. These are the 3 things that, as a controlling person, and I'm particularly aiming at controlling people today, not just the people that live with them. You need to do these 3 things if you're going to overcome that other behaviour and other behaviours we haven't quite got to yet. And the 3 steps go like this: mirror, Gallagher, rally. I'm going to come to those in a little bit more detail shortly. But just to give you a little bit more backstory. So I'd had the counselling, as I say, and I'd started to educate myself about stuff. And I started to understand it a little bit more, the psychology of control, at least as it was being taught online and what have you. But I thought, I've got to kind of test this stuff. So I started with asking myself lots of questions and ruminating about things I'd done and why I'd done them. And I thought I was getting some answers, but after a little while you start thinking, well, if this is just me, how do I test this? How do I know it's only me and that it's not control in general? So I started watching other people. And particularly I picked out people I knew that had controlling issues to some degree. They weren't necessarily what you'd call control freaks, but there was some controlling issues there. And I'd watch them in action. And I'd watch how the other people that they were dealing with would react as well. And the more I did this and I cross-referenced my behaviour and what I was starting to be honest about my motivations, that's where I started to develop and prove the demand disproportionate benefit escalation model, because I was seeing it all of the time. There was those 3 ingredients, whether it was an explicit or implicit demand in the first place, or even a veiled demand that would end up being proved by the time you got to escalation. This stuff was coming true again and again. So I'm starting to think, oh, I've got this. I'm starting to really understand this control business. Then after a while, I started talking to people about it, telling them a little bit about what I was doing. I think I told some people I was writing a book, but I started asking some questions. And more there was that pattern where I started to see events, and then in their behaviour, I would see drive. And then with their interactions with other people, I'd see permission. And this was where the importance of personal responsibility really started to come to the fore. That I realised that that was the key to everything. Taking or keeping personal responsibility, because again, as I was saying, I would see people who had been taken control of, and it was becoming more and more obvious that if they knew the game, if they understood the language, they could hold on to some control and some power instead of giving it over to the controlling person who was saying, you're responsible for how I feel, or I wouldn't have done this if you hadn't done that. All they really needed to do was say, no, this is what I'm responsible for. That's what you're responsible for. So it's all really, really coming together. I kind of knew there was something missing still, though. I'll give you a little story, and we might as well go straight into mirror at this point. So I used to play guitar loads. I used to be obsessed with it. I used to carry it everywhere with me. I was that guy that would turn up to a party with my guitar and bore the tears out of people, try and impress girls. It never worked, by the way. But anyway, I was obsessed with it. I carried it everywhere. And I was pretty good as well. I was limited in my knowledge, but I was pretty good. It was instinctive to me. But I used to play with this guy who, he knew everything there was to know about music theory. He could read a music sheet like he was reading a child's book. It was so obvious to him. Tablature, all that, and suspended this, and you name it. And we used to jam together every now and again. He used to get really frustrated because he wasn't very good. He knew what he was reading and he could kind of translate that to the strings. But when you listened to him, you thought, there's something not quite right there. It's almost clinical. Whereas I was doing it instinctive. And that's not to boast, but what I'm saying is it just came naturally to me. I felt it in the strings. I knew when to bend. I knew when to play hard and soft or leave a gap. Really instinctive to me. And a lot of people said I was very good at it. Eventually, though, we both kind of reached a bit of a wall in our own ways, because he could carry on reading music and he could carry on trying to copy it, but he couldn't necessarily produce. It wasn't very good to listen to. I didn't understand music. I didn't understand scale, so I hit a wall of my own. I could play it. If I could watch your fingers, I could copy people really quickly. I could watch their fingers on the board and go, right, I know what you just did, and I could copy it 9 times out of 10. But I was struggling to make stuff up of my own because I didn't really understand how it was supposed to go. So I'm doing all these things with people later on when I'm going through the control problem. And I'm working out event drive, and I'm working out the demand disproportionate benefit. And I thought I'd cracked it, but as I say, underneath, there was still an element of something not quite there yet. I haven't quite got it. In a way, I was reading the music, but I wasn't necessarily understanding the instinct behind it. I thought I did, because I thought I knew myself quite well, and all these things were starting to prove to me that I really knew what was going on. There was still something not quite there. There was one night I'd had an argument with somebody at work that day, one of hundreds, I'm sure, and I was sat at home and I'm going over and over it again. And I was concentrating on personal responsibility. I knew that was the key. So I was looking at what I'd done. I was looking at what the other person had done. And I'm going, no, I was responsible for that. I was definitely responsible for that. But I wouldn't be this way if it wasn't for that person. Kept coming back to that. Every time I'd almost get to the answer, it'd be, oh, if it wasn't for that guy. Suddenly hit me, was I really taking responsibility? On the surface, I was. But if you cut that little bit deeper, was I really taking responsibility if I kept coming back to this person over here? I was following instinct, wasn't I? Much like playing the guitar. And I understood the music because I understood the steps I was putting into place and watching them play out, but I wasn't bringing them together until that night when I did. Suddenly, the two had to come together. And this is where mirror comes into play. So what I started doing was imagining a mirror. Now, remember I talked about how my stepdad was always in the room. And I talked about how I'd gone through all of my life rejecting certain people or being horrible to certain people based on characteristics that would get a result or a reaction out of him, but I didn't know it. I realised I'd cracked the code with these people, that I was selecting people based on the reaction or the repercussions of those people being in his company. As I say, he was always in the room. So I decided I was going to do something. I was going to take a good look in a metaphorical mirror, if you like. But I was going to be aware that he was there. Now, to start with, you look in the mirror and your event is behind you, whatever it is. Like mine was him, yours could be a divorce or whatever. But the event is with you, and mine was certainly with me all the time. Whenever I started hearing things or seeing things that would set him off, I would imagine this mirror and I would imagine that event stood right there. And to start with, we're talking about noise or certain types of people. And I could see him coiling, winding himself up. And he's tapping me on the shoulder. You're going to do something about this. Because if you don't... When I first did it, I thought, right, I need to step right away from this guy. I need to stride away from him. That doesn't work. The thing is, he'd been there for 40 years dictating my reaction to everything. You don't just step away from that kind of stuff. But also, you step too far away too quickly, you're forgetting why you're doing it. And you need that reference. You need to remember why you are the way you are. So you remember what you're trying to move away from. So I start again, go back, same position, guy stood behind me. What I started to do was to inch forward, start to move out of range. So that tap is getting harder to reach. He's still in the mirror. I can still see him. And it's important that he stays there, at least for the foreseeable, until eventually I can move right out of the way. But I'm inching out of range. Remember the tennis ball machine? And I said, just don't turn up, don't go online, move out of range. And that's what I was doing. And that's what I continue to do. I always remember where I am. Each time it happens, I go back to that same spot. I don't stand exactly next to him like I did before. I remember how far I've moved forward, and I picture that, and I make the conscious decision to inch forward just that little bit more. The first thing you've got to do as a controlling person is go back and confront that event. You've got to share that reflection with them. You've got to know where you are, and you've got to make a conscious effort to just inch a little bit out of the way each time. If you don't confront your event, none of this is going to work. Look in the mirror. That's your first step. So we're at Gallagher, aren't we? We've done mirror. We know where we are. We keep going back to that position where we've stepped a little bit further forward with the intention we're going to keep doing that. We're making sure they're always in the reflection until such time we don't need to, till we've moved right out of range. And that could take years. But you're always trying to make that effort to move forward. And this is what I do, and this is what you need to do. The idea is to get towards personal responsibility. You can still keep them there, but it's always going to come down to you. The only way you're really ever going to do this is Gallagher. Now, as I say, with my stepdad, he'd had an awful upbringing. He'd had a brutal parent, but he'd also had a really tragic event, and it was the kind of event that would change anyone. I'm not going to go into detail, but honestly, it would change anybody, this thing happening to you. And I started to realise that he never really stood a chance, coupled with the fact that he didn't really have the intelligence to put the two together and to realise that had made him how he was, and that this wasn't necessarily a good thing. There's also an element of what all control freaks do, just saying, well, that's your fault. He was quite comfortable in that position, and you're trying to move away from that. You're trying not to be that person. With Gallagher, you've got to stop being angry with that thing, but you've got to make that choice to stop being angry about it, and you can only do that if you forgive them. Don't look back in anger, hence Gallagher. You've got to let it go. You can see what I could have almost called this section there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Gallagher's the one for me. Let this stuff go. Forgive them. Realise that they possibly never had a choice, or that even if they did have a choice, for instance, they're just a bad person and they enjoy it, and he certainly enjoyed it at times. You can't keep using that to excuse your behaviour. I've been hurt before, all of that kind of thing. Remember that? It's no excuse. Nobody else should be responsible for holding your baggage. It's yours. Carry it and do something about it. Don't look back in anger. Gallagher. That's the next step. The last one I've called rally. There's an episode in Friends that I always remember, and it's Ross and Joey, and they're throwing a tennis ball to each other. I think it's Joey. It might be Chandler, but I'm pretty sure it's Joey. They're throwing a tennis ball to each other, and I think Monica comes in the room, and they've had this rally going for something like 6 hours. And everybody loves that game, don't they? Remember when you were little kids? There'd just be two of you and your mate, and you're kicking a ball to each other, or you're throwing a ball to each other. And for some reason, that simple game, keeping that rally going, is really addictive. It's loads of fun. There isn't a kid that doesn't love doing it. If you play with your own child and you get a rally going, it's so much fun. But if one person throws the ball too hard, the rally stops. If you throw it too soft, it doesn't get to the other person, the rally stops. If you throw it in the wrong direction, the rally stops. The key to a rally is equal input and outcome. That's how you keep it going. You've got to approach every interaction you have as a rally. You've got to confront that thing in the mirror. Then you've got to let it go. You've got to stop being angry about it. And you've got to approach every interaction as a rally. Equal input for equal outcome. That's what I try and do now. I don't get it right all the time. This is going to be a lifelong thing for me, and it's probably going to be a lifelong thing for you as well. But if you have that word in your mind, rally, equal input and outcome, that's how you start to fix this stuff. Obviously, you can't do it without fixing mirror first. Let's go over those 3 steps again. Mirror, Gallagher, rally. I do these things every day. I remind myself of them in the same way that I remind myself of event drive and permission, or demand disproportionate benefit and escalation. I remind myself of mirror, Gallagher, rally. And I concentrate more on rally than I've ever concentrated on, because I really understand mirror and Gallagher now. I understand the importance of them intrinsically, but I make the effort with rally every day. That's what you need to do. Obviously, that's quite quick. I've condensed that down really quickly, but hopefully it makes some more sense to you. And obviously, over the next few episodes, I'm going to keep coming back to these things. I'm going to remind you of them in the same way that I reminded you about the guy in the first episode who spent his life looking out for shit he wasn't going to take. He keeps coming around again in chaotic control and in my behaviour. When I talked about my episode where I said that I wasn't going to take any shit, and that's how I approached every interaction. All of these things will come around again and again, and you're going to start to see them more clearly. So forgive me if I've gone over it too quickly here, but it will start to make more and more sense. But if I can plead with controlling people, and if your partner's controlling, they want to do something about it, show them this video, because they need to learn this stuff. It's the way to get through it. You're not going to do it with somebody who doesn't want to change. The point is, I wanted to change. Remember, I was the last man shouting in the room, and everybody got up and left the table. They've got to want to change. Trying to change somebody who doesn't want to change, well, you're off to a losing battle, but there's also an element of trying to control who somebody else is. They need to learn their own way. They need to make their own mistakes and feel the consequences for it. I'm weary of that word consequences to some degree, because that's what people use in this my truth thing and consequence culture. The consequences should be natural. It should be society as a whole turning the back on people that behave that way and just not accepting it. We shouldn't be taking it on ourselves to apply consequences to people, because that's controlling behaviour as well. Anyway, hopefully that's all made sense to you. Reminder again about leaving a comment and putting something here in the X, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. Questions, things I can help you out with, but also, am I the control freak? Really interested to get into that one with you. In the meantime, I'll leave you with the usual. Control the freak, not other people. Behave.